Kyle, can you explain just a little bit for someone like me who doesn't really have the understanding of what chronic fatigue is? How do you describe that?
Okay, so I suppose there's a couple of ways really. We're living in a world at the moment where people seem to be experiencing more and more symptoms: fatigue, pain, stomach and bowel problems, headaches, anxiety, depression, and medicine's not really got an answer to an awful lot of those. Now, when it comes to what is chronic fatigue and what is chronic fatigue syndrome, there's a number of names for that. So there's chronic fatigue syndrome, there's post-viral fatigue syndrome, there's adrenal fatigue, and there's probably a few others as well. Post-viral immunodeficiency syndrome is another. And effectively what they are clusters of what are a diverse range of debilitating symptoms. The primary symptom being fatigue. So you'll get fatigue, you'll get brain fog or cognitive symptoms where your memory's poor, you can't focus. There's very often anxiety or depression that may go with that. There may well be flu-like symptoms. There may well be aches and pains in muscles and joints. And chronic fatigue syndrome or adrenal fatigue or post-viral fatigue will be diagnosed through exclusion if you've seen your family doctor. That effectively means that you will have had a series of blood tests and medicine can't find anything wrong, but the symptoms persist and the symptoms are real. The condition of fibromyalgia is very similar. It's the primary difference being that the main symptom in fibromyalgia is chronic pain, and people have kind of sore spots as well at various points on them. But they will experience all of the same symptoms as sufferers of chronic fatigue syndrome. But as I say, their predominant symptom will be severe aches and pains. Now, lots of people say to me, "Oh, I'm chronically fatigued," and there is a difference between a sleepy tired and being chronically sleep deprived and just being kind of tired all the time. That is different from a symptom of fatigue. And we kind of know that if you have a case of flu and you're sort of wiped out, that groggy fatigue that you have if you have a case of flu is quite different from if you're just sort of tired. Now, there can be overlap between those two, but if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, it is different from just kind of being very tired. So that's what chronic fatigue is.
And a medical doctor can actually somehow figure out this is what you have, chronic fatigue syndrome, or they kind of not really sure, and they're kind of just trying. Is this a catch-all phrase for a lot of things?
This is a catch-all phrase. I think it's like lots of things, isn't it? Really, if medicine doesn't really know what's going on, it puts the words syndrome at the back end, so it takes your symptom and puts a syndrome at the end of it. So effectively, yes, as I said before, it's the diagnosis is through exclusion when it comes to your doctor. So that essentially means you present to your doctor with a series of symptoms, and after you'll go for a series of blood tests, so they'll come back and the doctor will say, we can't seem to find anything wrong, and if your symptoms persist, you may be passed around a variety of doctors. If your symptoms persist, you'll then receive probably a diagnosis of chronic fatigue. If you see a naturopath, you may get a diagnosis of adrenal fatigue. Or if you see somebody who specialises in pain and arthritis and those sorts of things, then you may well have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. Okay. But it is basically that it's that medicine, conventional medicine, can't find anything wrong. Now, and that's not to say, because I have lots of clients where they go and have all sorts of blood tests, and there's no doubt that there are a variety of things that are going on and going wrong in the body, but it costs an absolute fortune to get those tests done. And in my experience of it, most of them flag up what are downstream effects, if that makes sense. So I can tell you, if you like, what I believe the cause of chronic fatigue syndrome to be.
Okay.
So this is not that short.
Okay.
It's essentially my work is based around the idea that a body that is in a continual state of stress will break down effectively. And I think in modern parlance, we often think that we often use the word stress to mean if we're kind of overloaded. Now, there are different types of stress. So there's acute stress and there's chronic stress, and then there's stress you feel and there's stress you don't feel. So the acute stress that you feel is usually what people think of as stress. So I'm overloaded. I feel it. I feel stressed. I feel tense. So that's a type of stress. When we're looking at chronic stress that you don't feel, that's when the problem begins. The other important thing about stress is that regardless of the stressor, the stress response in the body is exactly the same. So what I mean by that is you could have a case of flu, you could have a car accident, you could fall down a flight of stairs, you could lose a job, you could be drinking too much alcohol, you could be exercising to excess, you could not be sleeping. All of those things, even though they're physical, environmental, and emotional or mental, the stress response in the body is exactly the same. Now, what effectively happens is that, again, when it comes to health and the way the medicine works, is medicine like to think of things in terms of there being a single cause for a single health challenge, and then you have a particular treatment for that health challenge.
Right.
So we all tend to think like that. Is this all right? Well, did this cause that?
Sure.
Now, I think the problem with that is that what we're beginning to see, certainly when it comes to chronic health problems, is there are multiple primary causes. When we can begin to understand that obviously your genes play a part in that as well, that when you look at the fact that the stress response is the same regardless of the stressor, what I experience and what I believe is that there are multiple primary causes, which are a number of stressors that back up. And this kind of keeps the stress response locked on. And effectively, this then leads to a rewiring of the brain. And it's a rewiring of the brain, which then affects the immune system, the autonomic nervous system, and the endocrine system. So the major systems in the body. And when the systems become either dysfunctional or kind of out of whack, symptoms are produced. And of course, again, what we're used to with medicine is this idea that we treat the symptoms. And of course, medicine does some amazing things, as we all know. But for me, if you're treating symptoms and the cause is still there, and you're not addressing the cause, the symptoms they'll either stay or they'll recede, and some other symptoms will replace them. So, in my view, it's vitally important that we address the cause. So there's a sort of a chain reaction, which is a body in a perpetual state of stress, which can normally happen over a period of time. That leads to this rewiring of the brain. That leads to this kind of dysfunction within the systems, and then that leads to symptoms. So my work is about coming back and saying, well, we've got to address all these stressors. Now, even though I said you can have a car accident, you could fall down the stairs, you could have a bad case of flu, usually those things are one-offs. Or if you have a particularly bad diet, or if you're drinking too much and these sorts of things, or you're exercising too much, they're an easy fix. The most difficult thing to fix or to identify and to rectify is the blockage of emotion, and that's effectively what the majority of my work is about. So even though I look at everything that may be contributing to what to the stress response being stuck on, in most instances it's the emotion that's the cause, or the emotion's the biggest factor. Because we've got, I would say, well, there's 4 pillars to health. There's emotion, and our mindset comes into that. But emotion is more than the mind. And then you've got sleep, which is incredibly important. You've got movement and exercise, and you've got diet and food. And those are the, so I look to address all four with people, but our emotion is the biggest. And just a quick word on emotion while I'm on a bit of a ramble, is that people often think that our emotion is a mental concept. This idea that, well, you think some thoughts and you have emotions that follow that. Now, what we kind of know from science now is emotion is actually much more than that. Emotion is a complex physiological process that affects all of your body and all of your brain. And emotion in and of itself is actually a non-conscious process that triggers feelings. So your body evaluates your interaction with your environment, and in doing so, emotion is produced, and that happens outside of your conscious awareness. What follows then is ideally you feel something. Now, we know it's possible to block feelings, but it's not possible to block emotions. Emotion keeps going. So what science tells us now is that our emotion then, when it's produced, then affects our thinking. So all of our thinking is kind of affected by whatever emotion is there. Now, we know as well, it is it's complex the way it all works. Thinking can then affect emotion, so you can create more emotion by thinking. But it's not that. But it's more complex than the way we used to think of it, which used to be that, well, your thoughts produce your emotions. So if I change my thoughts, I can change my emotions. What we know now is actually your thoughts initially are driven by those emotions and coloured by them. So everything people think is affected by emotion underneath. Wow. So which is kind of interesting, because the flavour, the texture, the content of your thoughts will be driven by whatever the emotional feeling is underneath. So even when people think they're being completely rational, their emotion and their perspective on life, their perspective on themselves, is affected by the emotion that they're experiencing in that moment, which leads us to the point that, well, your thinking is never a true reflection of reality. It's not really you. It's just something that's kind of actually influenced by the emotion that's there. So the more negative emotion a person has in their body and brain, whether they feel it or not, the more thinking will occur in their brain. So that's the thing, is emotion. So you've got this emotion is produced, and then the thinking centers of the brain light up.
Wow.
People start thinking, and of course then if you can start thinking, you can start producing more emotion, and then you get a loop that goes on.
I think most of us think of ourselves as thinking beings first, but what you are saying is we are more emotional first, and then whatever we're feeling emotionally drives the thinking.
Yeah, it's not the sole cause of thinking, but it's a big factor in thinking. It's a strange thing, thinking, isn't it? Because I don't think we can control our thoughts. Again, there's a lot of there's a lot of books and programs and people out there that say you can control your thinking, but I don't believe you can. I think we can direct it to a certain extent by being aware, having that knowledge that my emotion is going to affect my thinking, the volume of thinking and the nature of thinking. So I can direct my attention, rather than to my thinking, to my emotion. So a lot of my work really is getting people back in touch with their body and their emotional feelings. From that thing, I just think in the West, we've become very, very thinking orientated.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we believe that we can solve everything through thought.
Right.
And what I look to do is say, well, thinking is very important, but what we need to do is balance up the head and heart, if you will. We need to trust there's that emotional, intuitive part of us. And for me, there's a spiritual piece to that, which is, I think that's your soul. I think the true essence of us is a flow of consciousness that kind of flows through us. And I think, there's emotion, and then almost underneath our emotion is that intuitive knowing, realizations, insights. There's, but I think you've got to be in your body a little bit more, and certainly present to pick up on those little sort of nudges that flow of consciousness or soul will give you.
Wow. You've mentioned your work a few times, and why don't you describe a little bit of your work and what you do, and maybe even some of your educational background and how you got into this line of helping people?
So I'm a psychologist by trade originally, and so I suppose my interest in health, I experienced anxiety and depression in my late teen years and early 20s. So that kind of sparked my interest. Always a very emotional, sensitive person. Um, and so, I went through college. I worked in management consulting as a psychologist at the start of my career. I then moved into healthcare because I just had that desire to help. It's very, I guess it's quite common, isn't it? But it felt like a bit of a mission, really. And having come through my own issues and learned a lot about myself and about the types of issues I was having through my own experiences, I had that thing I suppose lots of people do of wanting to give something back. When I got interested in chronic fatigue because I was working with a medical doctor back in the early 2000s over here in the UK, and he had a particular interest in chronic fatigue because his girlfriend at the time had it, and as a doctor, there was nothing he could do for her. So he began to kind of research and to learn and to train, and he put together the seeds of what has blossomed into the sort of work I do now. So I worked with him for a number of years. Certainly in the early 2000s, because the work was emotion based and kind of stress based, and therefore looking at that mind body connection, I think we were a little bit before the curve, really. People weren't really open to the idea that you could have a physical illness with an emotional cause, or emotion is one of the causes. And of course, for me, stress is what brings mind and body as one, because as I'm saying, regardless of the stressor, the stress response within the body is the same. So I think stress and emotion, and the fact that emotion involves all of the body and all of the brain, that shows us that mind and body are one. So we can obviously have health challenges that have a structural or organic origin, and you talked about your neck pain, and as I said, I work with people with pain, and it's always important that we understand what the underlying cause of a symptom is, because my perspective is, right, well, our body uses feelings or symptoms as feedback. So that's I guess a basic tenet of what my work is all about, is that whether it's hunger, whether it's tiredness, whether you're walking down the street and a stone pops in your shoe and you feel a sharp pain, everything is feedback. And when we experience some symptoms of a health challenge, it just means our body is shouting its feedback at us.
Sure.
And I think, often, again, in the West, because medicine has got that materialistic perspective of, looking at the body as a machine, the universe as a big random kind of,
Right.
kind of object that is kind of just a series of cogs and things like that.
Right.
It doesn't look at it in that kind of holistic sort of way. So I think that when we come back to more of a holistic kind of perspective and understand that our body is working for us, and when it sends us something, it's trying to tell us something, we then obviously need to understand what the cause is. So, if I'm working with somebody with pain, we need to understand, right, well, is there some structural damage there? What is the cause? If a person has sees a doctor, has scans, and there's nothing perceptible to identify what the cause might be, there's every chance that the cause of that pain is an emotional cause. Now, how would it be an emotional cause? Well, as I said, through that chain reaction I talked about of emotion, brain rewiring, and the systems of the body, when the autonomic nervous system is kind of cranked up or out of balance, then muscles, one effect is that muscles will tighten.
Sure.
When muscles are chronically tightened and working, things get pulled out of place. So it's very often that pain symptoms arise through a tightening of muscles. And an example of this is I'll often have people that will have head pain or headaches, and it's very often, it kind of starts at the back and it radiates and behind the ears and under the eyes. And because the scalp is a muscle, what's happening effectively is the scalp is tightening, and where it kind of joins in the sensitive areas is where the pain is felt, almost like you've got your head in a vice. So, again, I'm kind of probably waffling on a little bit here, but it's just trying to give an idea of,
Sure.
there's, in terms of the work I do, there are various sort of stages. Some of them are deep and spiritually focused, but at the basic stage, it's looking at it from this perspective that, well, our body is our friend. Our body uses symptoms as messengers to let us know that something's not quite right. And rather than just trying to, push the symptoms or suppress the symptoms, we need to understand what's going on. And in many instances, I think with many chronic problems, it's because a big factor is the stress response is stuck on, and the little kind of metaphor I like to use is a bucket, and say, well, your stress bucket is full. What we need to do is have a look at everything that's in that stress bucket.
Mm. Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. I know that there is a physical aspect of what is going on with my neck, but I also know that emotional things add to that physical problem and complicate it, and so I fully get that. And whether it be, I hold my stress, I guess, if that's in my layman's terms, I hold my stress in my shoulders, the area where I have pain.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but
I think it's a perfect way of putting it. Yeah.
My stress actually augments the problem that I have physically. I guess physically that's a weak part of my body, but then all the emotional stuff that goes on, if I'm not dealing with it properly, just makes it all worse.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's kind of often how it works, isn't it? I think that's the thing, is if there's a weakness somewhere, that's the first place where we'll experience a symptom.
And we can talk more about that here in just a moment. Let me just mention, you have a book. You're an author. Your book is called The Intelligent Body, which I think is pretty obvious based on our discussion what you mean by that. It's far more than just kind of a black and white definition of what's going on. It's far more than that because it's your emotions and trying to be intelligent about what all is happening below just the obvious. I gather that's what your book is about.
Yeah, it's as I say, I think that in the West we think that our intellect is the pinnacle of everything, and it's trying to say, well, there's an intelligence within your body.
Sure.
And from an evolutionary perspective, if people would want to look at it like that, you could say, well, for thousands of years we lived in small tribes, in little villages of probably about 100 or 150 people, and our body evolved to live in that environment. Over the last 100 or 150 years, our culture and our environment has changed dramatically.
Sure.
But our body probably hasn't changed that much. So we went from being in touch with our bodies and being in touch with nature. We went to bed when it was dark. We got up when it was light. Now we're not. So I think that we kind of live in our heads. We're constantly on our phones or on our devices. We have lights, so we're always on. So I think we're thrown out of whack, and we constantly try to think about things. And lots of people are in this kind of treadmill of life where they're doing one thing, but they're thinking about the next 6 things they have to do. And I think the result of being very much up in our head and disconnected from our body means that we've lost that connection with the the intelligence in the body. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say is, well, our intellect is very important, but the wisdom of the body is something that we need to pay attention to.
Sure. Sometimes I've had this thought of how unfortunate it must have been to have lived so many hundreds of years ago, because they don't have aspirin and they don't have things for their to help their vision problems and all of that. But yet, what I think I just heard you say was that all of the so-called conveniences that we have, or advancements, actually may make it in many ways more difficult for us than what people would have experienced a couple hundred years ago, or at least just as hard in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure we're happier. I don't know. It's sort of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're obviously not going to stop the exponential rate of change that we're experiencing.
Right.
But and I'm sure life probably is better now. We're not getting eaten by bears and lions like we were in those days, are we? But I think that the level of disease and suffering that's probably, the diseases and the suffering and the health challenges we've got are just very different.
So your book can be found on your website. Again, your book is The Intelligent Body, and your
You can get the book anywhere, really. You can get the book on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble.
Even Audible, right? Audible.com.
It's on Audible as well, yeah. So it's published by W.W. Norton and Co., and they're based out of New York.
Okay.
So it should be in most stores, really.
Good.
It's cheapest
Tell me
on
about
Amazon, I think.
what's your website address?
My website is energyflowcoaching.com.
Okay. And on there, of course, you can find out. It's a very nice site. You can find out a lot more information and your book, or get your book through Amazon, as you mentioned. And we can also find you on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, Instagram. Lots of different ways to get connected with you. You have a workshop coming up here in November 10th and 11th. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called the Chronic Fatigue and Pain Solution Workshop. It's 2 days in Washington, D.C. on the 10th and 11th of November. And it's designed for sufferers of chronic fatigue and pain symptoms, whether they be mild or severe. And I have to say, it's not that it's designed that after 2 days people are, cured.
Sure.
But it's what we're doing, myself and my colleague are doing over the 2 days, is outlining the fundamental principles of what is energy flow coaching. So the way I work is I offer a 15-week program, and the 2-day workshop gives really the skeleton, I suppose, of that 15-week program. Because obviously there are people that will suffer from fatigue and pain symptoms that don't necessarily have chronic fatigue syndrome. If you have chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, it is something that takes a number of months for the brain and body to rewire back to normal health. But it is possible. So lots of people will have been told, if you have anyone watching or listening that has had a diagnosis of, say, fibromyalgia, they would have been told by their doctor that there is no cure, there's nothing that can be done, you just have to live with it. And I've worked with hundreds of people who have got better. So you can get better. That's the crucial thing. It's not that it's there's no magic bullet, though. It does take a bit of work, and my coaching process is pretty intense, but it guides people through a process whereby they can recover.
And I'm assuming that whether or not you struggle with chronic fatigue, actually just hearing your information could help them in whatever area they're struggling with, and if you help in one area, that can improve other areas. And
yeah,
so
I mean, well,
I guess,
yeah. So I in terms of what I do, there's a broad spectrum. So when it comes to health, I work with people with fatigue, pain, anxiety, depression. I do life coaching as well, though. I do business coaching. Half of my work in life is spent within organizations. So where I help people to improve their performance. The principles are kind of largely the same, really. So it's all about me And this is why it's called energy flow coaching, is because it's that belief that we're designed, our default factory setting is to be well-beings where we thrive. And when we're in our own flow, our own energy flow, we are thriving. And my view is that even though it's our default setting, people kind of get off track and can't find their way back. So my job is to bring people back so that they can align with their own flow, and when they do, they experience not only good health, but they can experience kind of peace of mind, a clear mind, improved performance, all those sorts of things.
Again, if you're just joining us, my special guest is Kyle Davies. I am Pastor Tom. You can find out more about me at 24today.org. I have a blog and podcasts on lots of different subjects there. You can also find out more about me at tomweitzel.com as well. Kyle Davies, as I mentioned, is my special guest, and he is a real authority on chronic fatigue and just lots of other things like anxiety and depression and fibromyalgia and things that you yourself might have been diagnosed with and you just really don't know where to head next. Well, someone like Kyle and his website can help you with that. Kyle, I want to kind of wrap this up now, if that's okay. And I would like to just get some practical take-home ideas. Now, again, I am someone who I don't suffer with chronic fatigue, and yet I do have chronic pain. So for all of those who are suffering just with something chronic, some type of pain, what would be some general ideas that you would suggest for us?
Okay, it's a big area and it's a complex area.
Oh, sure, yeah, I know. Yeah.
So the simple take homes I would suggest, the good starting points are being a little bit more present in your body and beginning to be curious about the emotional feelings that you have. Our tendency is to immediately resist and push down any uncomfortable emotional feelings that we have. And I suppose my main take homes are, if you can, even if you practice for a couple of days to start with, is that being present, being a bit more present, and allow everything you feel to be okay. When you can embrace the notion that what I feel is not a problem, that's quite profound. And it's profound because we do, without consciously being aware of it, we spend an inordinate amount of time resisting or blocking the feelings that we have, or trying to fix them. And as I was saying when I was talking earlier about thinking and the connection between thinking and emotional feelings, a lot of the thinking we have is based around trying to solve how we feel.
Right.
And often we're doing that by thinking about what needs to change, what's going to happen, who am I, what's wrong with me. It's all about trying to rationalize or solve or analyze or find meaning, because, again, as human beings, some of the deeper drives are to get away from discomfort towards comfort.
Right.
And I think that to a certain extent, mastery of life can come from allowing ourselves to tolerate a degree of emotional discomfort. So being in that space of, actually, what I feel is not a problem. I don't have to solve what I feel. Now, that doesn't mean I don't need to take some action out here in life, but I don't have to solve how I feel. So, and I don't have to, try to normalize it and ask if other people feel the same, or is it okay for me to feel this? It's just, this is how I feel, and it isn't a problem. And when you do that, even if what you feel is fear or anger or guilt, there's a layer of suffering that is removed, and the layer of suffering is the resistance. The more you resist that, I don't want to be the kind of person that feels that, the bigger that discomfort gets. So that's my kind of take homes are: be more present in the body, in the now moment, and allow everything you feel to be okay, and be in that space of, what I feel is not a problem. I don't have to solve what I feel.
That's great advice. We complicate, what I'm hearing you say is we complicate the bad feeling by trying to figure it out. and find a medicine to take care of that feeling, or some type of drug or something else, as opposed to just saying, what I feel is how I feel, and there very likely is a message there that I need to kind of figure out what is my body saying. I need to listen, be more observant of this moment, and kind of figure out it, as opposed to just solving and getting out of the pain, but listening to what's going on, and then learning and accepting what's happening. That I think could go a long way in all the things that we struggle with, because again, as Westerners, we just assume that there is a logical reason that can be solved, from a book or diagnosis or from a medicine. There's a logical reason, as opposed to emotional reasons, and then there's also a quick way or a logical way of getting out of it.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy. Kyle, I want to thank you for your time, and I know that for myself, that's a really good take home for me. Instead of trying to look for the quick solution of why my neck hurts, and there are obviously physical things that I can do and should do, but I should also say, is there stress in my life that I'm not dealing with well, or am I pushing myself too hard, or do I need to, there's other things other than just trying to find that quick medicine or logical solution. There's more spiritual reasons, that maybe I could be in touch with.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Kyle, again, can be reached at energyflowcoaching.com. He has a 2-day workshop coming up on chronic fatigue in Washington, D.C. It's Chronic Fatigue and Pain Solution, and that's on November 10 and 11. And you can find out more about that at his website. And anything in particular about registration or cost that you want to talk about connected with that?
Well, people can register through the website. I think it's probably better that people have a look at that. And there's a little video of me talking more about it.
Okay.
So yeah, if anyone's interested, read all the blurb and then take it from there. If anyone wants to talk about it, see, there's there are forms on the website people can fill in, and I'm more than happy to chat and explain more.
Great, Kyle. I want to thank you for your time today. It's a great discussion just to open up and be thinking about. It really is far too complicated and too deep to be able to really do a lot of figuring it out within a short podcast. But it's a good thing to begin thinking about and trying to just try to steer ourselves away from thinking that there's an obvious quick fix, there's an obvious one size fits all way to deal with this, but instead be a lot more intelligent and look within more towards solving these issues. Again, my name is Tom Weitzel. You can find out more about me at tomweitzel.com or 24today.org, and Kyle Davies as well on his website. I want to thank you again for listening today to this podcast, and if this was helpful for you, then it's going to be helpful for someone else. If you could click like or share, subscribe to this channel, it will help. It will just help to be able to get this message out. Again, just a quick reminder that there's still time left today in this 24-hour period to live life. So thank you again for listening, and Kyle, blessings on you and your help that you're giving to people.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on today. It's been great to be here.
You're welcome. Pleasure.